So now I'm going to turn it over to ALDEA's Executive Director, Arianne Peterson, to share more about the history of ALDEA and ABPD and our current programs.
All right, well, thank you, Deb, and thank you, Sue. That was very interesting way to start our morning. So I'm going to just build on what Sue talked about with the context of Guatemala, the context that ALDEA and our partners at ABPD work within, and share first some of the history of our organization. So ALDEA has been around since 1967. And ABPD since 2006. So I'll try to touch on some of the most important points of that history and how our programs and our work has evolved into what we do today. We have, things have changed, obviously, with the context and with our work over those many years, but we've had the same core values during that time, which are our commitment to the place and the people, specifically in the Western Highlands and Chimaltenango, and commitment to sustainable integrated development and to empowerment. So the understanding that people know how to address the problems that they have in their communities, the development issues, and we are just providing the tools they need to support them in that. So hopefully you'll see those things throughout our history, and then also when we see the site visit later. Our history begins with the founding of the Bearhorst Clinic and the arrival of our founder, Dr. Carol Bearhorst, in Guatemala. He was a Lutheran medical missionary from Kansas. He was stationed in Antigua originally and to provide medical services, but he quickly realized that the need was higher out in Chimaltenango among the indigenous population who really didn't have access to medical care. And this photo is of Doc with his family who followed him here in the late 50s, early 60s. And let's see, I wanted to mention, so our website, we recently had a very active group of volunteers, board members, and others who put together a very nice timeline archive of our history basically on our website. So if you go under who we are, you can find that in our menu, and you can look, there's actually full text PDFs of some of the books that have been written about our history. There's a lot more photos, there's a lot of personal stories there. So if this is something that interests you, please check that out at aldeaguatemala.org. So Doc went to Chimaltenango to try to serve the Kaqchikel indigenous Mayan population there. The story goes that in order to build trust as this American gringo doctor, he first sat in the Central Park on a bench for days at a time, waiting for people to approach him and say, what is this guy doing? They found out he was a doctor. He was interested in providing medical services. Eventually someone was desperate and decided to ask him to provide those services, and the rest is history, as they say. He founded the actual Bearhorst Clinic in 1962 in Chimaltenango as a resource primarily for these Kaqchikel Mayan population that otherwise didn't have access to formal medical services. That is a picture of the clinic. Doc focused on, rather than setting up what we would consider, a Western style hospital, focused on looking at the people, the local population, and what they really needed for their care to be successful. So he, I think he had one Ladino nurse that spoke only Spanish and was formally trained, but he also hired and trained Kaqchikel nurses from the local area who could communicate in the same language with families, which wasn't something that was otherwise available. And he recognized that, the whole family, patients were more comfortable when they're surrounded by their friends and family. That's how they're used to receiving, healthcare. And so he made that a priority. And within the hospital, the family members would be providing, a lot of that day-to-day care for the patients. They would stay there with their patients. They would, help bathe and feed them, work closely with the nurses to help with their care. So here's a few photos of how that played out. So it didn't take Doc very long to figure out that he was being successful in treating diseases that he would see come through the door, but that treatment only lasted so long. They would go back to whatever home environment they came from, and the same problem, they'd get the same issue, and they'd have to come back. So the quote that he's famous for at this point is saying, it didn't take me long to realize I was trying to empty the Atlantic Ocean, or at least a good-sized lake, with a medical teaspoon. So he became very interested in addressing the root causes of the diseases he was seeing, socioeconomic issues, environmental factors, hygiene, access to resources. And, that was kind of the beginning of the work that ALDEA does today in terms of public health and development. So he pioneered what is called the Health Promoter Program in 1964. So he trained community members. In the beginning, they were men. We still employ this model today with women in our programs, which we'll talk more about, and you'll see in our site visit. But originally, he trained men from different communities to provide basic medical services, and also to kind of advise, on different development things that could help make a healthier environment in the communities. So, so this program was very successful, and was eventually recognized by the World Health Organization in a case study that they did in 1975 as a model for development globally. Of course, as Sue alluded to, after that, unfortunately, the Civil War and violence really limited what kind of work Doc and the clinic were able to do for a number of years. So going back a little bit, the organization that eventually became ALDEA was originally founded in 1967 as Bear Horse Clinic Partners. It was, friends and supporters of Doc's work from the US that wanted to help. They established a nonprofit 501c3 organization that would then send funds down to support the clinic. Eventually, we were called Bear Horse Partners for Development, recognizing that more development angle of things. And then in 2015, we adopted our name ALDEA, which stands for Advancing Local Development for Empowerment and Action. ALDEA in Spanish in our local communities is another word for village. So we chose it partially based on that. So we continued to support the clinic directly through the early 2000s. Doc passed away in 1990. So, the work that he founded certainly continued after his death. We did eventually realize that, ALDEA, as this funding organization based in the US, a priority was this public health, this development angle of things that we wanted to support, that part of Doc's vision. The clinic became, more and more controlled by local Guatemalans, which was what Doc had wanted, and was focused on the curative medicine side of things. So both important initiatives, but not necessarily the same direction for one organization. So we did go separate ways. The clinic is still providing healthcare in Chimaltenango. They're still operating. And then obviously ALDEA is here, and we founded in 2006 Asociación ABPD as a local organization that would carry out that development work that we fund on the ground. So they are our sister organization, and Sue talked a lot. She's one of the board members. There's been a lot that we've been able to accomplish during our history together that we'll talk about. Chronic childhood malnutrition. So this was something else that Sue identified in her talk as one of the biggest problems facing Guatemala today, and you know, with dire consequences on many levels. So this is just, I think, a really striking image where you see, you know, on the left, children from maybe communities where ALDEA and ABPD work in rural Guatemala. And then, you know, children with the same theoretically genetics that have access to the nutrition that they need. So, you know, the stunting is very visibly evident. As Sue said, the consequences for mental, you know, your capacity is not always as evident, but also very, very important. It's a complex problem. It has a lot of, you know, causes. You can't address just one of those causes and expect to have a big impact. You really need to focus on the big picture. So a few of those causes here that we focus on: people don't have access to clean water. It's a basic need, but you'll find in the communities where we work, and this was the case in the community Chijacinto, that you'll see now that after the result of our work together, women and children would have to spend many hours a day, in many cases, just carrying water and bringing it back to their homes to use to meet their basic needs. This is a water source in the community of Chijacinto. This is where they're carrying the water from. So, you know, they may have to travel quite a ways to find a place like this, and it's not, you know, what we would consider potable water by any means. This is a picture of those same people carrying, you know, on a mountainside, carrying that water back, and you can just see what it looks like in these bottles. So this is a situation, and if they want, you know, to try to sanitize it, they would have to boil it over their cooking fire, you know, for a period of time to try to at least make it potable. But obviously there's other issues going on. This causes gastrointestinal diseases, which in turn, you know, and hygiene issues, which in turn affect the nutrition status of children and adults. There's also an issue with household sanitation. Most households don't have a dedicated, you know, formal latrine, a place where people use the bathroom. They may just, you know, designate a spot outside their home, and that, you know, is of course unsanitary. There's runoff, there's all kinds of contamination that happens. The same is true for wastewater, you know, from washing dishes, washing clothes, that will run off to wherever it goes. It will contaminate, you know, other local water sources. You can see here just some pictures of gray water in a community. And it often, you know, I've heard people say that it causes issues between neighbors, right? Because your water's running off into your waste is running off into their compound. It also is very dangerous for children. So kids will play in these water puddles or things, and, you know, they'll pick up whatever bugs were on, you know, food or waste, and they'll get sick themselves. And then that causes them to not be able to absorb the nutrients that they do take in. Smoky fires. So most families in the villages where we work cook inside on an open fire. You can see that in the background here, and this photo just shows what the air quality is like in a kitchen like that. You know, the smoke often doesn't have anywhere to go, and women and children spend hours of every day, you know, they cook 3 times a day, and they spend hours and hours of their time in this kind of smoke. They get respiratory diseases, they get headaches, they get problems with their eyes. It also affects, you know, unborn children in a similar way that smoking cigarettes would, or secondhand smoke. It causes low birth weight and other issues that impact children's nutritional status directly. It also takes more firewood to cook over an open fire, and that means people either have to spend their hard-earned money to buy firewood, or they have to go collect it themselves, which takes time and also contributes to deforestation, which in turn contributes to environmental issues, especially erosion. So landslides are a problem, especially impacting agriculture in these communities. Like Sue said, they're all on an angle, a lot of them, and you know, you can have crops ruined due to landslides. So all of these issues are intertwined. Let's see, and then, you know, of course, there's the actual nutrition itself and the kind of foods that people have access to in these communities. Food insecurity is common. They might not just have enough actual food. Or there might be an issue of the nutrition of the food they have access to. So the traditional diet in these communities is corn and beans, which is great. It can provide enough calories, but if it's not supplemented with other nutritional foods, you can still have malnutrition. So the first 1,000 days of a child's life are the critical window that's been identified, you know, internationally, and that means the conception through the age of 2 for a child is really when the nutrition is most important for, you know, determining the path they'll be able to lead on the rest of their lives. So there's a need, you know, people don't generally have access to things like prenatal vitamins, education. Then once a baby is born, you know, breastfeeding is common, but there'll often be, you know, weaned after just a couple of months, or they're fed things like, you know, coffee as right away that, you know, children really shouldn't have. So there's a need for more education about appropriate feeding of young children. And then, of course, we have cultural roles of women and men. There's a real, you know, in many places, right? But definitely in Guatemala, this idea of machismo, or what is the expected norm for men versus women. This might result in, you know, men being served first, or eating, you know, the best kind of piece of the best nutritious piece of the meal that's available. You know, they're doing hard physical labor, so it makes sense, but they might not realize their children's nutritional needs as well. You know, men are often the decision makers. When we go to a community, we'll meet with the local development council. It'll usually be all men. You know, we have a water committee. There's lots of leadership positions in a community, and we'll often find no women are actually part of those conversations. And so women are primarily responsible for childcare. They're responsible for getting water and taking care of their family. They're responsible for cooking, but they're not the ones who are, you know, having a voice in how the community, how these things are set up in their community. So that's an issue. So we could, you know, just provide inputs and resources. We could install a water system. We could address these issues, you know, as outsiders coming in. But that wouldn't be a sustainable model. You know, you hear stories about, I don't know, houses being built and then left unused, or things like that. That's the last thing that we want to happen when we leave a community. So our approach is to try to empower those community members to identify and then address the issues that they're experiencing. So one piece of that is that we don't, you know, approach communities to work with them. We wait for villages to come to us and say, hey, we've heard about your program. We think we really have some problems that it could help us address. You know, would you be willing to work with us? We often have, as we currently do, a waiting list for communities and families to get into our program. Let's see. We work with each village for 3 years. So the first 2 years are really about that direct programming. The staff is there with them. We're working together to build the infrastructure pieces. We're doing trainings together. And then the third year is something we added a few years ago during our last strategic plan to really help with that transition to being independent for these initiatives. So we follow up, we do family visits, we support the promoters, so the women who are chosen by their peers to be the leaders of different elements of the program, whether it's agriculture, whether it's nutrition or sanitation and hygiene. Our staff really work to train them and develop their leadership skills so they can carry things forward. Let's see, yeah, most people approach us because they've heard that we do potable water systems. Those are a huge resource intensive, the materials for those is a huge part of our budget. It's expensive and often inaccessible to communities. But when people participate in our trainings, it's clear that generally a healthier life for their children is their highest priority, just like for many of us. And they are inspired to work to address the malnutrition issue as well. Let's see. So part of the way that we approach community empowerment and that ownership, that sustainability piece, is that we we require significant input from both the community members themselves who are participating in our programs and also their local governments. So Gordon alluded to this during the last presentation, is that we partner closely with the municipal governments, which in Guatemala is kind of like a county level that we think of in the US. So there's a municipal capital, and then there's, a number of different, maybe 10 or 20 smaller villages that are part of that municipality. So if we're doing a water system, the community members themselves are actually responsible for purchasing or obtaining the land that's needed to build that water system. So we need a place to put the tank, we need a water source, which is often a spring, that the land around that needs to be purchased. So this is not an insignificant commitment. I mean, these pieces of land can cost a community $10,000, $13,000 that they have to come together as a group and come up with. So they organize their water committee. They do a lot of the labor themselves. We at ALDEA and ABPD provide a lot of the materials. But the water committee, as the project goes forward, is responsible for collecting the small fee regularly, monthly, that it takes to keep the system maintained and running smoothly. So that is, an ongoing expectation that people sign up for when they agree to be part of the project. Yeah, so we provide a pump, often the pipes, the cement blocks for the tank, those materials. And the municipality provides their technical expertise. They will be the ones to do a water study or a hydrology study, and then they help with some of the oversight of the project as well. So it's we all sign up what we call a tripartite agreement. So the community representatives, ALDEA and ABPD, and then the local municipality. And we work with generally a couple municipalities at a time. Right now, we're working with the municipality of Comalapa. We are finishing our work with the municipality of Tecpán, and we're starting to work with the municipality of Chimaltenango itself. So the kind of more rural area around the main sort of state capital city in the area. And so we build those partnerships, and then try to focus on the needs of the communities in those areas during our partnership together. And there is a legal requirement. So you heard a lot about the national level governments and the corruption, there's a legal requirement for the local municipal governments to provide these water systems to their communities. But often the funding isn't there. You know, a lot of these issues that we heard about on that national level play out on the local level too. So it's kind of a win-win for the municipalities to work with us, because, you know, we help them fulfill this requirement that they're supposed to fill, and you know, they also we also get to draw on some of their expertise and have their support. So we work with the communities, though, to understand what their rights are and what the government is supposed to provide them, and then you know, help them advocate with their local governments to make sure that they're getting the services that they should be entitled to. Let's see. So all of these pieces have come together. So this is the current kind of approach that shows the strategies and the specific programs that we implement now. So our program, it just continues to evolve over the years. In 2012, with our strategic plan, and I think Deb alluded to this, we do a strategic plan together. So ALDEA and ABPD sit down and we decide the direction that we're going to go together, and then, you know, we work together to carry that out. So in 2012, we decided to really focus on addressing the issue of chronic childhood malnutrition. And we do that in a way that, you know, we work together on that issue with the communities. We show them, you know, tools, we provide support and train them in leadership. And our hope is that once they've had this experience of addressing this problem, they'll be able to address further development issues and, you know, implement their own programs in the future. So the main objective is to improve the nutrition status, especially of children, but, you know, we're also hoping that we're building the capacity of communities themselves to address problems on their own. And so we do this through three main strategies. Community mobilization gets at that sustainability and empowerment piece that I was just talking about. So we organize a lot of trainings and workshops. Women learn about their rights. They learn about issues like domestic violence. They get leadership training. They learn about nutrition and agriculture. They vote and select their peers as promoters to lead the program forward. That's a very important piece. We do something similar with youth. So, you know, youth learn about all different kinds of issues and their rights. And then we also give them the opportunity to do their own project. They can submit a proposal to us and then receive up to $1,000 in seed funding to start a project that benefits their community and also is sustainable. So we've had a lot of different projects, everything from, you know, laying hens and selling eggs to help provide more nutritious food in the community, to you know, maybe selling supplies needed for weaving and economic development that aren't available somewhere else. So that's an exciting piece. And then our men's engagement program is our newest piece of this strategy. And that came about in 2018 when we were doing our strategic planning process and getting feedback from community members. The women who had participated in our program said, you know, this is great. You know, we learn all about what our rights are, what should be happening. But, you know, at the end of the day, the men are still in charge of things and they don't understand. And so in order to really achieve equality, you need to work with the men. And so we took this to heart and created, in 2018, we started piloting our men's engagement program. And that has been a way, it's voluntary and participation varies from community to community, but men, they learn, you know, the value of including women and youth in discussions, leadership discussions. They also learn a trade, so they get to help kind of make it valuable for them. We allow them to choose a skill that they want to learn, and it might be, people have chosen everything from masonry to small engine repair to electrician type work. And we hear a lot of amazing stories from the men themselves, but also from their family members about the kind of change that has on their actions and the way they treat their their families and their communities. So infrastructure is pretty straightforward. We address those health and hygiene issues through potable water systems. We build sanitary latrines for each household. We also include a gray water filter, which is important. So when you get potable water at your house, you also, the need for a drainage system goes up because you're doing all this cooking and cleaning in your sink. So we provide each household with a gray water filter that takes that waste and provides a path for it to get back and cleaned and back into the groundwater. And then we provide vented efficient stoves. So instead of cooking over that open fire, you'll see in our site visit the stoves that have a nice safe cooking surface. They vent the smoke outside. They use less firewood. In our nutrition side of things, we do sustainable agriculture programs both at the family level and also working with primarily men who grow crops like corn and beans that are staples for families. So for the household level, we do family gardens, we provide dairy goats. More recently, we've added some other options to our program at the request of families. So meat rabbits and laying hens are now part of that as well. We work with people on post-harvest food storage. So, it's great to have people growing their own corn and beans, but if they can't store those until the next harvest, they're not going to be able to benefit from them. So we help with that. We do nutrition education, especially focused on, breastfeeding, appropriate weaning, those young children. We do family planning. Of course, people can't, if they have limited resources, they need to be able to determine the number and spacing of their children that they can support with those resources. That's a nutrition issue. And then we do address disaster preparedness. So Guatemala is one of the most affected countries by climate change because of where it is. And, aside from, you may have heard of volcano eruptions, we also get those climate change related disasters like drought, like, monsoons and things that cause landslides. So we try to help communities mitigate those. This is just a little way to show you where we work specifically. So far since 1967, we focused on the Department of Chimaltenango, which is primarily Kaqchikel indigenous Mayan population. And what we've been able to achieve since ABPD was founded in 2006, we've installed 87 community level potable water projects, impacting 13,000 or so families in 127 different communities. And the really exciting thing is that part of our monitoring and evaluation process is to go back to those, we don't go to all 90 communities every year, but we do a random sample and go in and check. And we've always found that our water projects are still functioning even after 10, 15 years of being run by the community themselves. One kind of nice story that I've heard is, the local staff got a call from one of the past partner communities. Oh no, their diesel pump that, the motor that was running their pump broke, it burned out. The staff were worried they're going to be asking us to cover the cost of replacing it. But the question was just, so we've gotten a couple of bids from this company in Guatemala City to replace it, and we just want to know what you think. Are those fair prices? So I think that goes a long way to show really the ownership over the projects once we have finished our 3 years with the community. We've worked with, so the average family size where we work is about 6 people. So we've worked with nearly 80,000 people in the 6 different municipalities that you can see here. You can see a few of them. The more current ones are here. But these are the different municipalities in the Department of Chimaltenango, and we've worked with 6 of them so far. Other ways that we measure success. So we measure the nutrition status of children and determine the rates of malnutrition, chronic malnutrition. But we also, and certainly numbers, and there are quite a few quantitative things that we look at based on our strategic plan, but we also have some more. We have to get more creative when we're measuring, this idea of how empowered is a community, what's their capacity for leading their programs. So we look at women's leadership. Like I said, when we come in to a community, usually the committees, the actual positions of leadership are held all by men. When we get into our second year, we will find that, up to 25% of the women we're working with have taken on some sort of those roles. So we look at that as a success. One of our indicators is, are women willing to report domestic violence if they experience it? We ask both about whether they would, and then we look at, is it being reported? We see men supporting women in trainings over the last few years, especially since we've started the men's program. This used to be unheard of, but this is a picture of one of our nutrition trainings. They're doing a recipe demonstration, so learning to cook a nutritious meal from locally available ingredients, maybe garden produce, and there's, a woman was not able to make it. Maybe she was sick, and so her husband took the day off work or did whatever he had to do and came and did the lesson himself, which is pretty amazing in terms of just understanding how the family as a whole is valuing our programming. Let's see. We've had instances where men who've gone through our training have demanded, maybe they're part of the water committee, and they say, we need to get 2 women on here because we can't make this decision without understanding their perspective. And then what I already mentioned, the sustainability of water projects, the fact that they're functioning even after many years after we've stopped our direct partnership is important. So let's see, I think this is all I'm going to share. I think we have some time for questions before we take our break, but I also want to just go back to some of these before pictures, because this is, you're going to see up next our site visit in the community of Chijacinto, and they are, I think, well, they're finishing up with the direct piece of the program. They are just going into the 3rd year of monitoring and support that we provide. But so they have a water system, they have stoves, they have gray water filters, and you can see, so I want you to remember these pictures of what it would have been like for them before, in contrast to what you'll see in the pre-recorded site visit. So I think it looks like we maybe have some questions in the chat. Okay, how many people are in the typical community project? That's a good question. So we take in, every year, we have the 3rd year communities graduate, and we add new communities that just start the program, which is actually happening right now this month in April. And we tend to target taking in about 500 families every year. So we'll be working with maybe 1,500 families at a time, because we've got some in the 1st year, some in the 2nd, some in the 3rd. And it varies in terms of how many communities that actually is. So we have some larger communities that might have, I think our biggest water system maybe was 400 families, I want to say. But a lot of them will have less than 100, so maybe 75. Chijacinto, where we did the site visit for today, has 80. And not all families participate in the program with us. Usually the majority of them do. Some of them might have their own water source or something, and don't see a need for it. But often what happens is we'll work with one group of families in a community, and then the next year, another group of families approaches us and says, hey, this actually looks like a really good idea. Could we get involved in that? So we'll have, right now, I think we're starting a second year, a second cohort in a village that we started working in last.
So I think Tom has a question.
Okay.
I'm not typing correctly. Excuse me, I'm old. What's your life expectancy on the eco stoves you're installing?
Ooh, on the stoves, I don't know that we've run up against. So that's a good question.
How long have you been installing them?
So our stove design has evolved over many years. So I would guess, it's the last 10 or 15 years or so. And we started with a very, very efficient model, and then found, through feedback that people weren't using it as they should. And we realized, that people are used to eating over an open fire or around an open fire, as a social tradition, a gathering. And so we implemented the current model that we have, which you'll see, which has a big cement insulation on the sides. It has 3 different places to cook, because another thing we found was that if we didn't give them enough of a cooking service, they would start another fire because they've got to make tortillas, they've got to make beans, they've got to make coffee. So our stove design is one that has evolved for our families. It includes, masonry, as well as like the other, the stove surface, the chimney. But I'm not sure that I've ever heard of any of them like not functioning anymore after 15 years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I can jump in on that too.
Okay.
Because they're constructed out of parts that are available at the market, the local hardware store equivalent, people can repair them themselves. And another piece of it that one villager mentioned to me was that if they were ever to move, it's very easy, because it's a simple cinder block construction, just to take it apart, move it to another place. So while other NGOs that I've visited that work with a different type of stove often go back 2 years later and the stove's not being used, it's not there. That's not what we found at ABPD.
Thank you.
Okay, and Susan had a question about other NGOs. Are there other NGOs working in these villages? And are other NGOs doing the same kind of work in other parts of Guatemala?
Right. So Deb, I will probably draw on your experience to help answer this question, but I'll say first that we do partner with some other local NGOs to complement our work. We do that a lot. One of them is Ceres, that works with youth and youth empowerment, youth leadership development. So, we work intentionally with the same groups of youth so that they can do different program pieces with Ceres, like they have a youth congress or, a big event every year. And then they also benefit from our programs like the mini grant program that I talked about. So there's a lot of synergies, and there's, yes, there will be other NGOs working maybe in the same community at the same time, usually on different kinds of projects. So, but yeah, there's many organizations doing, especially like water, maybe with a different approach. Deb, I don't know if you want to speak more to that.
Yeah, so I've visited a lot of different NGO projects around Guatemala, and the reason that I'm now working solely with ALDEA and ABPD is because the way that it's implemented here is really very good. And so other NGOs are also interested in talking with us and learning how we do it. Just as we talk with other NGOs and take the best of what they do to improve our program as well. There's a lot of cooperation between NGOs in Guatemala. And then James has a question. What is the attitude of family planning and how is family planning implemented? And we should have mentioned that WINGS, which is involved in family planning, is a huge partner of ours.
Yep. Yeah. So Sue, who spoke earlier, you know, has actually was a founder of another organization called WINGS that really works on women's reproductive health and men's too, and family planning. And we do partner with them. So if someone in our program wants to go for a more permanent option like a surgery, we'll refer them to a WINGS clinic, for example. So how is family planning viewed? Yeah, it is a topic that people don't like to talk about in the communities, that is for sure. You know, but I think as far as I understand, is Sue still on? I think she had to drop off because she's the expert in this. But as far as I understand, you know, that attitude has gotten more open. People are more willing to discuss this more recently than they were in the past. We do it, so we provide training. One of the promoters that will be chosen among the women participating will focus on family planning. They'll be kind of the resource long-term for other women who have questions, or, you know, they even get trained to like provide things like the depot shot. And then we provide the methods. So after we leave a community, that is actually one way we don't talk about enough, but we get a wholesale rate on family planning supplies, and we continue to provide those to all the communities that we've worked with. It just makes sense to do it that way because we can do it more efficiently. And then we continue to rely on those promoters to kind of distribute those and support their fellow community members. We also do you know, the way we really work on it is we do home visits. So we have a dedicated staff person who visits every family who's working with us, you know, the women or the couple, and discuss, you know, the benefits of family planning, the options that they have. And then obviously it's a choice that each individual family will make for themselves. But that is how we approach it.
And just to add a short story there, I was in one of the communities and working with a young mason as he was building a latrine, and, you know, out in the hot sun talking, and asking him about his future. And he says, well, you know, he's planning on getting married in a while. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And he says, and we're talking about, you know, how many children to have, 1, maybe 2. I thought, wow, this is really good to hear. And when men, it doesn't happen very often, but when men come and request vasectomies, that's helps us to understand that success is being made.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, go on, Ari.
Well, your story reminded me that it is a part of our youth program as well, that they, you know, receive the basic information about options available and family planning generally. And then it's also, you know, all of our programs are so integrated that, you know, the water committees, when they're looking at providing a potable water system and what is the appropriate size, you know, our staff encourage them to think about, well, what is the growth of your community? You know, what's that trajectory look like? And they, you know, use that opportunity to talk about family planning. Well, if each family has 8 children, then this is the kind of water supply you're going to need. And if each family has 4 children, you know, or whatever, they see the impact of family planning in many different ways through the program.
And I think Gordon has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, just to tail on to that, at the last village we visited, this was a village that had gotten its water supply implemented. They had new stoves, they had latrines, they had all of these things which improved their lives. And we had, so this is a group of, 20 of us, and we had a round table with 3 women from the village. And they discussed what the impact of this project had been on their lives. And it was remarkable that they mentioned, in spite of all the water and everything, these women said, I ended up knowing how important I am. And that was just stunning. I mean, in a sense, this plays into that. They now have a voice in their lives down there that maybe they didn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what a wonderful thought to end on. Thank you, Ari, so much for helping us to understand what to look for and what we're going to see in our next section, which is going to be our virtual site visit.
Mm-hmm.
But first, we get to take a break of about 30 minutes to stretch our legs, get a bite to eat, and we'll meet back here again right at 2:15 Eastern PM. In the meantime, please turn off your camera, mute your microphone. See you soon. So you didn't record that, Ari? Jeez, that's my best story.
I was kicking myself. Maybe you can do it later and we'll add it.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. So I'm really excited because we're coming up to what is, I think, the most interesting part of our program. And it's our pre-recorded visit to the community of Chijacinto and Tecpán. And this community just finished their 2nd year of work with us. And they're going to be staying in a program for this one last year for direct monitoring and support. So it was in January of 2021 that ALDEA and ABPD began working with 80 families in Chijacinto. And it's one of the more remote and hard to reach villages that we've worked with. So we have a unique opportunity to hear from them today. But first, I want to give a personal welcome to the Rotarians of District 7790 in Maine and Quebec. And that's because Chijacinto Tecpán is one of the communities where Suzanne's District Governor's Project is currently partnering with ABPD and funding the nutrition, maternal, and child health activities that you'll see here today. And next year, Tina's District Governor's Project will also be a partnership with ABPD to fund all of the components of the integrated program in several of our communities. So finally, it's a pleasure to introduce Johanna Cap, who will be our host as we visit Chijacinto. Johanna is an ABPD field supervisor and a specialist in monitoring and evaluation. Johanna is responsible for training the village health promoters that are elected by the community, as Arianne mentioned. And Johanna then mentors these health promoters as they are the ones that train and support the community, the families in the program. Johanna has worked at ABPD for 11 years, and she's been crucial in leading and helping to shape the integrated ABPD program. So, Johanna, it's over to you.
Buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a la comunidad de Chijacinto. Estamos a 46 kilómetros de la cabecera municipal de Tecpán. Chijacinto es una comunidad en la cual Asociación BPD inició trabajos hace más de 2 años. Cuando iniciamos a trabajar en esta comunidad, no tenían acceso a un sistema de agua segura, no tenían letrinas adecuadas, también estufas mejoradas. Y entonces vino la Asociación BPD a realizar trabajos de capacitación, también en el área de saneamiento y agua. El día de hoy vamos a conocer un poco de esta comunidad. El primer punto de encuentro será en el tanque de agua. Posteriormente nos dirigiremos a unos hogares para que ustedes puedan observar cuál ha sido el avance de esta comunidad. Síganme. Esta comunidad, cuando BPD inició a trabajar acá, había mucha desnutrición. También en los hogares no se contaban con sistemas de higiene adecuados. Entonces empezó a trabajar con diversos temas de capacitación, como educación nutricional, empoderamiento, también agricultura, agua y saneamiento. Pues vamos a visitar uno de los tanques de distribución de agua de la comunidad. Pues esta es una red de distribución que va por gravedad, o sea que no necesitamos de bomba ni de motor, ¿verdad?, que impulse el agua para que ésta llegue a las comunidades. Llegamos al tanque de distribución de agua de Chijacinto. Pues el día de hoy nos acompañan dos miembros del COCODE, está don Marcos y don Sergio, que ellos nos van a explicar cómo funciona el sistema.
Muy bien, gracias a Dios primeramente y también usted como institución EPD. Estamos muy agradecidos con Dios y usted también por el apoyo. Estamos viendo que aquí anteriormente no eran así el agua potable. En cambio ahorita está funcionando bien el agua. Testigo a los personal de la comunidad que ellos están informando que es un beneficio para nosotros. Por eso nosotros estamos viendo, eso es un logro lo que estamos viendo. Tú es el principal bien allá del nacimiento. Ese bien allá directamente del nacimiento es el principal tubo. O sea, el central, decimos nosotros que está bien allá en el nacimiento y llega aquí en el tanque.
El comité de agua en cada comunidad pues se quedan al frente del velar por el buen funcionamiento del sistema. Ellos son capacitados por personas expertas, ¿verdad?, para que ellos le puedan brindar el mantenimiento. También velar porque todos los sistemas de agua tienen un sistema de clorador, tienen su clorador y ellos velan para ver de que esto esté funcionando adecuadamente, tengan sus pastillas de cloro, hagan las pruebas químicas que necesita el agua a cada cierto tiempo y entonces ellos quedan preparados, ¿verdad?, para darle mantenimiento a esto. Entonces la relación de BPD con ellos ya es eventual, ¿verdad? Cuando ellos tienen alguna pregunta, alguna duda, ya se comunican con el técnico para que ellos les dé asesoría, pero ellos ya quedan capacitados para velar por todo el sistema de agua. Bueno, Mateos don Marcos, Mateos don Sergio, Janina Mateos Chivema, Kaqchikel del sistema Chijacinto. Mateos Chava, Mateos Chiva. Pues hemos concluido nuestra visita al tanque de agua, entonces vamos a seguir nuestras visitas ahorita a los hogares. Bueno, estamos acá en otro sector de Chijacinto. El día de hoy vamos a visitar uno de los hogares. Pues a pesar de las estadísticas, de todo lo que podemos haber trabajado, así como el sistema de agua que acabamos de visitar, también el gran cambio y el impacto que que se logra con el trabajo lo podemos observar dentro de los hogares. Y hoy vamos a visitar uno de los hogares de una de nuestras participantes para que ustedes puedan observar el cambio. Acompáñenme. Estamos llegando a la casa de doña Lorena. Acompáñenme, por favor. Doña Lorena. A tots. Doña Lorena Matios. Matios Chavae. A tots, doña Lorena. Matios, ¿qué naan? Vaya, cari doña Lorena. Pues, tenemos una visita en ABPD, ¿ok? ¿Será que alcanza para atacar proyectos, sabes?
Bien en plancha,
Ajá.
Y segundo, con huertos y en baño y sumidero.
Vaya, ¿te gustó para la plancha, sabes?
En plancha.
Ajá.
No, ya no sale mucho humo en la cocina. Y cuando las leñas me sobran mucho porque no he hecho mucha leña en la plancha. En cambio, si estuviera ya en el suelo, tengo que echar mucha leña para que el fuego arde mucho, pues. En cambio, en la plancha son unos 3, 4 leñas lo pongo y ya se arde mi fuego y ya no tengo humo más en la cocina.
Bueno, pues estas son las estufas ahorradoras de leña, ¿sí? Donde tienen un sistema que en la parte interior no va parejo, sino que tiene un desnivel. En estas estufas lo característico es que ahorramos leña. Se utilizan 2 o 3 leños nada más y se calienta hasta esta parte. Entonces se pueden hacer 2 o 3 actividades al mismo tiempo. Se puede tortear, se pueden poner alimentos aquí que también se van cocinando. Y también nos puede servir como una mesa, ¿verdad? Al momento de la comida se sientan alrededor y comparten, ¿verdad? Un momento. Estas estufas también tienen un espacio aquí a un lado donde en época de invierno pueden colocar los leños para que se sequen y pueda arder más rápido. Para que las familias puedan optar a una estufa mejorada deben de llenar ciertos requisitos, como participar en las capacitaciones y también tener la necesidad, ¿verdad? Que me refiero a que no tengan una estufa previa. Entonces se hace una línea basal en donde nosotros visitamos los hogares y podemos verificar que realmente lo necesiten. También BPD da el material que se utiliza y las familias beneficiarias son las que dan la mano de obra. Entonces, y algunos otros pequeños materiales, pero es algo mínimo. Costo alguno por los materiales que se le brindan no aportan las familias, sino que ellos aportan directamente en la construcción de las estufas. Bueno, vamos a ver el huerto de doña Lorena, su pequeño huerto, que está en 2 secciones.
A ver, core macacuy, core acelga y espinaca, y remolachas, y cebolla, y también repollo, y cilantro, y whisky, y otros más, señor Kaqchikel. Porque ya tiene que ya está patiendo, o mercado, ni matan cebolla, ni matan, o preparar un alimento que quieren familia, por ejemplo, huevo con espinaca, solo quieren más para espinaca, y lo huevo en revuelto, en torta con espinaca, ya quieren familia, me puede estar en lo richaj, porque en conchri, cilantro, sin han preparado un fideo, un caldo de pollo, como en más en cilantro, whisky, como se puede cuando quipe, como en partir, ya puré, chiquirin ney. Harían cacina whisky por eso que y también el repollo si quispe como en catijnan entre la familia cori y chagri macoy también chan catij y recibe cebolla también como cachica comida cojo gran beneficio como un pechero por la asociación BPD con apoyar con las semillas pero ya que a través que ya nos equiacan tiene que de ver hoy en calor chica semilla en can juler can sembrar haricinoche.
Pues este es el sumidero, que esta es la caja de la trampa de grasas, la cual viene a dar a un pozo. Esta viene allá de la pila, se dirige para acá y el agua viene a depositarse aquí a un pozo. Este pozo tiene una profundidad de 5 metros, en el cual va a dar, son las aguas grises. La trampa de grasas necesita su mantenimiento para que se vayan extrayendo, ahí sí que las grasas, la basura que pueda venir de la pila y para que no tape las paredes del pozo. Entonces el pozo va absorbiendo el agua gris y el agua ya no corre a flor de tierra y los niños ya no la agarran para jugar, sino que evita muchas enfermedades con esto también. Ya Lorena, jampe tiempo ni alojre ya cada hija.
Todo el día y toda la noche.
Todo el día y toda la noche.
Y acá paposa ni acá más pedir.
Inchi ni acá mavi.
Aquí la chica la suan.
Ah, checa la suan.
Ajá.
Estas son las letrinas que trabaja la asociación.
Si no tiene letrina es cojo su cama beche porque antes manak letrina y ahora na tepa baño tiene que na tepa taquiche o casi que manak espacio china teche. Pero Matías de la asociación ABPD su yari ka letrina ya chiron ka encuentro ka limpiar. Si no tiene otros ka letrina Matías de la asociación ABPD su yari ka letrina. Pues ya ni ya lang uns porque manak pues de chikna tepa takchina teche y coch ka letrina naka. Are no che.
Achkeri materiales shiyares y achke materiales shuyari asociación.
Creo que Sherry casi que no chit más ni me cayaro porque ya Sherry creo que chun cayaro. Creo que la chil arena amarillo creo que eso existe para que cómo se puede que roxis canoxagri baño como en que sagri bloque en ka ancha po junchik baño mismo la bloque en ka y la lámina y no que se puede porque ya que arena no marquinta cemento cobi. Chajari y como que le sag casi que la mayoría ya la asociación me pedir jarjación y también chica togri albañil solamente quiero callar de mano de obra en cambio no jarjari asociación me pedir ya solamente.
De esta manera terminamos la visita aquí en la casa de doña Lorena. Ay, aprovechando, vemos que viene la compañera Evelia, entonces ella es otra integrante del staff de BPD. Y pues Evelia es la encargada de hacer visitas domiciliarias. Y pues vamos a observar cuál es el trabajo que ella realiza, ya que doña Lorena es una de las madres que tenemos dentro del programa y también tiene bebé, entonces vamos a observar el trabajo de la compañera.
Lorena, pues bien, vaya. ¿Cómo en el mapa? Ay, Matías, chave. Chacua, papel, suita. Hashun go. Cavalry, passeio de marcha, chacua. Para mí sí es que esté. 65. Para mí ona o ya es que esté. Vaya, entonces niña por hijun chic chave, porque nina me está que ri o shi niña por chave. Tan auxil. Entonces niña por hijun chic, nina me está, shejun cucharita, rono, jes ni ma. Ya en a quitar ut en ya poch. Entonces nina me está tapan a quitar rono, jes ni ma. Y va a ver, jantate, va a ver cori, seña, un cucharadita. Tan auxil. Bye. Entonces ver y rucan frasco. Entonces tan auxil, talla poche, iría prenatales con una olla esquistina. Vaya, entonces niña por un chictana porque necesario.
Cuando venimos a trabajar a Chijacinto, lo más evidente que necesitaba un trabajo inmediato era el estado nutricional de los niños. Y pues en eso fue que se empezó a trabajar y a darle mayor importancia. El trabajo que se debe de realizar es integral, ya que el mejoramiento del estado nutricional de los niños no depende solamente de una adecuada alimentación, sino que también de la higiene, de que vayan a los servicios de salud, de que tengan sus vacunas a tiempo, de que la transición a alimentos sólidos sea adecuada, que tengan su lactancia materna exclusiva. Son muchos factores de los cuales se deben de trabajar. También el ambiente en la casa, ¿verdad? La higiene, todo va de la mano. El que tengan acceso a agua segura para preparar alimentos, para consumir alimentos, incluso para la misma higiene de las familias es indispensable el agua, ¿verdad? Entonces, por eso es que el trabajo debe de ser integral para poder combatir la desnutrición. Doña Lidia, Utz Mateos, ya Johanna va a visitar. Pues Mateos, pues está. Vaya. Pues estamos visitando el hogar de doña Lidia. Ella es una de nuestras participantes también dentro del programa. Y aprovechando la ocasión, les quiero presentar a unas mujeres muy trabajadoras que son nuestras promotoras comunitarias. Está doña Baudilia, está doña Florinda, doña Florinda, y también se nos acaba de unir doña Lorena, que es uno de los hogares que visitamos ahorita hace unos instantes. Entonces, les agradecemos a ustedes de parte de la asociación el gran trabajo que hacen. Entonces, nos dirigimos allá con doña Lidia, por favor. Vaya. Pues justamente venimos a la hora en que ella va a empezar a juntar su fuego. Napón Paraguay.
Ponchani.
Vaya.
Kan ni visaje video che.
Solamente metió 2 leños y de ahí unas ramitas. Y con eso es suficiente. Ella nos indicaba que ahorita va a empezar a hacer sus tortillas. Entonces, vamos a ver cómo tortea doña Lidia. Vamos a visitar el huerto. Remolacha, ¿qué más?
Saber que estaban chautardi.
Espinaca.
Espinaca.
Cebolla. Estamos observando la letrina también de la casa de doña Lidia. Como podrán ver, es la misma estructura de la letrina anterior.
Kaqchikel letrina de que utsin tsotien porque no her chel de para capacitaciones majun letrin rex shin lo kufchin shin ya polachla es que me gusta na shaqchoh na ekitaqri me gusta na knits pemnek kami utsin enche kumla kan antes coche tifchin taqshiyarti chispaqti bunchwe echanin más buen shun tijure blokri kachoh kamajuna shigavila na tokchpan kirin tsotinche.
Aquí está el depósito del agua del sumidero. El agua que sale de la pila viene a caer a la trampa de grasa. De la trampa de grasa viene el agua a caer al depósito y no vemos agua corriendo a flor de tierra. De esta manera evitamos enfermedades gastrointestinales, ¿verdad? Aquí estamos viendo la pila de doña Lidia. Como nos pudimos dar cuenta, es la misma presión que vimos en el hogar anterior. Y aquí este hogar podemos observar que hay dos chorros o dos llaves. Y doña Lidia nos cuenta que este es del sistema antiguo, pero que no cae ni una sola gota de agua. Y este es del sistema nuevo. Jampe tiempo en coger ya cada quij, doña Lidia.
Runugel qijko.
Ronogel
Runugel qijko.
jampe oran ven el jun quij.
Mahun eta.
Mahon
Mahun
beta.
kampenan aishan noong ko la tu kita krea po. Kani. Kachin además la man eta.
Man beta.
Kachok man eta la ko kaya. Ha.
Y isbankan que takmanuklun tayach pandere injina ikama baya.
Rik akilaka ning amak akholti tiswan akilaka.
Ajá.
Ha.
Janina Mateos Chávez, doña Lidia Sofacoch para Macho y Ojretash Bejun y Jauque.
Bye.
Mateos Chávez. Pues vamos a visitar un lugar más, solamente que tiene los mismos proyectos que visitamos anteriormente. La única diferencia es que en este hogar hay unas cabras. Las cabras se les dan a las familias que tienen hijos de 2 a 5 años, entonces no en todos los hogares vamos a encontrar una cabra y este es uno de ellos. Entonces vamos a visitar a esta participante para que ustedes puedan observar que están las cabritas. Achkerubi la cabra. Ah, Johanna. La cabra se llama Johanna, dice. Esta cabra que vemos acá es el macho. Ajá, y la de allá es la hembrita. Vamos a visitar a doña Florinda, que es nuestra promotora, la cual nos acompañó también, y la vamos a entrevistar unos minutos. Flori. Oh. Shopech bauken. Flori. Macri Samajri andat como promotora ABPD. Gajón ka shach chavech keri samaj shabarat. Chpan recayijonari samaj pekiken.
Rin samaj mi promotora y taqrin samaj rish kachoperi rish katsukeri kasamaj chin institución BPD. Speri kasamaj qarki rashigo. Hash pe shugari plancha. Ish taqshqakuri plancha harish beki kindi shoqi chutaqash kana visita shiqatstak or shimesaj fotos ntiqichira rigo chikira nun qasamaj nchapechwe y harish begin shinel pataq kikin taqlan visin y después spechik qabaño mismo chiqa en visita shiqatsu qasamaj y spech rismeder mismo shaqnan shqan kirish y después que es funcionar y después chapechi kirat y después que es casamaj kakula ukirat harishkakul mismo kakul capacitaciones que quiere Virginia capacitación de kirat harir casamaj karajo promotora y casamaj más kaana ukirat harir harox kayari capacitación chiquir kabanaj pues más participación Tohari ichker kakul que kakutchkus kakul derechos de la mujer y de pachkir bir sección planificación familiar y nutrición harish kakutchkus pues harish kasamaj kan promotoras nare y ka huerto chkar y harish katzut y harish Harish kakutch chikemona an chikemona tikat con chikemona an ra ababon gel harish kaish ka tsochke harun kasik chkerbi
¿Y con cambios yuyapan y kaslen de capacitaciones chicos?
Ko porque es katamaj que chikemon ka tsukri ya cual de 0 a 6 meses 8 meses katamaj keriri porque es kakul capacitación chikemon kayach Kemon ka tsuktia kwal taqstu chop tirbaj harish kakul capacitación ka shakobi y richel ni chaveri ka riqa huerto shiaosh man katsnel chikna pa kaibul na los na ho cebolla cota capo a rábano, remolacha, acelga, repollo, jari y chipilín, quilete, jari apio no gel. Cachoch mejor será para caslen arriba ve para comunidad porque mana es na Tecpán na jori sita capo. Jari buen será va ve porque chumuchin querí es hasta espera calla. Chapón y calla más que yo toja la calla porque la calla porque majunchor y majunchor te espera institución BPD porque utsi mashaj porque mashaj que material que no gel y harishin shqacho institución porque a mí ya och calla y que a mí me atsnel la chiquia e pataqsuan porque ra nunca majo calla majun ya cuesta nada porque a mí suficiente ya desde 24 horas calla majusta ihtash tbe shajo ayarita haqlapo ihata bana chajón hachkarat nada chajari buen shu harishu kamape para comunidad necesita que ir pero si más para comunidad que buen shu ranachque que ir di cabra chqash o cabra porque harish qaqul para institución harish qaqul hari
Mateos Chávez Flori, Mateos Cheri Samaxi como promotora. Entonces, una pequeña visita va a ver para mi comunidad. Janina Mateos Chávez Shojacol y Shojaban a atender y Chaca Shojaban a acompañar. Chirica, Nica visitas Jan, Janina Mateos Chávez y Ojretach, pero que juntos.
Mateos Chiveris, Mateos.
Va, Flori, Este ha sido nuestro viaje aquí en la comunidad de Chijacinto. Gracias por haberme acompañado a este tour virtual. Como se pudieron dar cuenta, todos los fondos que ingresan a ABPD vienen a ayudar a familias que lo necesitan, de escasos recursos y de las comunidades más alejadas de Chimaltenango. Así es que los esperamos en una próxima oportunidad y nos vemos. Hasta luego.